Welcome to the Brain Injury Association of New York State's webinar, Improved Outcomes for Women Veterans, Brain Injury Services as Part of a Trauma-Informed Environment. I am Carla Giovaniello, Brain Injury Training and Services Project Director here at the Association. Thank you for joining us. Before we begin, a few housekeeping details. Because of limited time, we ask that you please hold your questions until the end of the presentation. During the Q&A session, questions can be submitted via the question text box. The text box option should be visible to you on the GoToWebinar toolbar on your desktop. If you are having trouble viewing this option, please contact Citrix Tech Support at 1-800-263-6317. Again, that number is 1-800-263-6317. This number should also be visible on your toolbar. Our speaker will do her best to answer questions in the order that they are received. Any questions that she is unable to address may be submitted via email to the association. We will be recording this webinar session and plan to post it along with the PowerPoint slides to our website, which is www.bianys.org. Information about contacting the association and viewing the webinar will be provided in a follow-up email after the presentation has concluded. You'll also find my contact information will be included in those follow-up messages. Before I turn the microphone over to Jill, let us begin with a quick poll to see who is in our audience today. I'm going to launch that now. Please take a moment to answer the question. I'll give you about 10 more seconds to answer. All right, I'm going to close the poll now and share the results. All right, it looks like we have some variety in our audience. I always like to see that as an organizer. I want to thank everyone that's attended today for your participation and for helping to spread the word about our webinars. It really is nice to see such growth as an organizer, so thank you. Now it's with sincere pleasure that I introduce our webinar presenter for today, Jill Gutierrez. Jill has been a program analyst for the Women's Bureau Region 2 Office of the U.S. Department of Labor since 2008. In this role, she promotes programs and policies in the interest of working women, advocates for their equality and economic security, and promotes quality work environments. Previously a USDOL MBA Fellow in Washington, D.C., Jill has a master's degree in public affairs from Princeton University and was awarded a Thomas J. Watson Fellowship after receiving her bachelor's degree from Colby College. We're so happy to have her here today. Jill, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. And I would like first to thank you, Carla Giovaniello and Judith Abner, for inviting me on behalf of the Women's Bureau to present to you all today. I'm very excited to be here, and I hope that I can present information that will be useful to the audience today. So today, this is a little outline of our discussion. Basically, I'm going to introduce you to the Women's Bureau, about how we work, what we do, and then a little bit about what is trauma-informed care, why we're proposing trauma-informed care in the care of women veterans, what the Women's Bureau is offering, and how we would like to work with you. The purpose of this presentation is to help you, the audience, understand if the Women's Bureau's free resources could be useful to you in your work, and to tell you how you can access those resources. So about the Women's Bureau, as Carla said, we're an agency of the U.S. Department of Labor. We formulate standards and policies to promote the welfare of wage-earning women, meaning we look at the challenges of working women, improve their working conditions, increase their efficiency, and advance their opportunities for profitable employment. Like most federal agencies, we're DC-based, but we also have 10 regional offices. I work in the New York City office, which is located at 201 Barrack Street in the West Village, and we cover New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. At the end of my presentation, I'll provide you with the contact information for all of the regional offices across the country so that if you're not in New York State, you can contact the office that's closest to you. So how do we work? We achieve our mission through partnerships. We're a small agency, and we understand that the direct service organizations know the populations they work with most intimately. And so in developing our programs and policy recommendations, we rely on your expertise and your experience, your understanding of your population to make sure that the programs or guides or resources that we offer are relevant and successful. We do receive direct service phone calls, but we don't have direct service capabilities. So we truly do depend on our community partners to achieve our goals of moving women towards economic security. And these goals, through these products, we need your feedback on them to make sure they're relevant to what the challenges that you are seeing. Here's the first poll question. Does your organization have women who have served in the military among its current or past clients?
I'm going to launch that poll now. Please take a moment to answer. I'll give you about 10 more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the poll now and share the results. So Jill, I know that you might have trouble seeing the results. 72% answered yes, 9% answered no, and 19% answered not sure.
All right. Well, the reason that we are asking this question and presenting this to an audience of people who have interest in brain injury is that we know that 6% of all veterans using the VA's health services are female. And that's an underrepresentation of the actual percentage of women veterans that exist. And so the idea of presenting this information to you, if you're from the outside of the VA, is that perhaps these women veterans are coming to you, and perhaps you know that they're coming to you, and perhaps you don't know that they're coming to you. One of the things we'll talk about later is why you may not know that they're coming to you. So what does the Women's Bureau do? We're an executive agency. We're part of the executive branch. And we have 4 strategic priorities, one of which is equal pay, the second of which is workplace flexibility. The third is promoting higher paying jobs for women. These are jobs such as non-traditional jobs like carpentry and electricians, but also jobs in the science, technology, engineering fields. And our 4th strategic priority area is helping homeless women veterans find a path to good jobs and financial security. So this is moving women veterans in the transition between their military and their civilian careers. How do we help make that a successful transition? So since this was a new priority to the Women's Bureau starting under the Obama administration, we started with a number of steps. The first step was to do listening sessions, both with women veterans who had experienced homelessness at some time, as a representation of women veterans who were the most disconnected from the services that they were available. But we also did listening sessions with service providers, or the people who were trying to provide them with, it could be job services, it could be mental health services, it could be regular health services, to listen to what the challenges they were having with accessing and serving this population. We also did all women stand-downs across the country. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term stand-down, as I was before we started this, a stand-down is a place where veterans can come and receive resources or access the services that otherwise they may not have known about. And these are all, most of these across the country are open to all veterans, male or female. But the Women's Bureau promoted doing ones that were all women to promote sort of an environment of inclusion. And we had these in Kansas City, in Long Beach, California, and in Austin. And interestingly, for those of you who are in the New York State area, we know that there will be one in Westchester County on June 7th. So if you're interested in participating and learning more about serving veterans in this way, please do contact me. And finally, all of this information combined with sort of an academic literature and an academic reading of the experiences of women veterans led to the creation of this guide called Trauma-Informed Care for Women Veterans Experiencing Homelessness, a Guide for Service Providers, referred to as the Trauma Guide. And this guide is a free resource. It's a resource I'm going to tell you a little bit more. And my question to you is, how can we help you to take advantage of it? Here's a second poll question. How many traumatic brain injuries did the U.S. military report from 2000 through the second quarter of 2012?
All right, I'm going to launch that poll now. Please take a moment to answer. Maybe about 10 more seconds to answer. All right, I'm going to close the poll now and share the results. All right, so it looks like 11% chose that first answer, 94,393. 41%, it looks like we went in order, chose the second answer, 167,654. And 48, the most people chose the last answer, 253,330.
Well, the correct answer, as many of you guessed, was 253,330, and that is from data from www.health.mil, so sort of a database of health-related issues according to the military. So what is trauma-informed care, and why am I talking to you about this? Trauma-informed care is a strengths-based framework that is grounded in an understanding of and responsiveness to the impact of trauma. And it emphasizes the physical, psychological, and emotional safety for both the providers and the survivors, and that creates opportunities for survivors to rebuild a sense of control and empowerment. So what it is it involves using what we know about trauma and its impact to respond differently to our clients, and to look at all of the aspects of our programming through a trauma lens, and how all the aspects of our programming are affected by the person's trauma lens. So what's the evidence for using this method of creating your programs and designing your programs and having feedback? The evidence is that there's a reduction in the trauma-related symptoms, meaning the trauma stops taking as much of the forefront of the response. Other preliminary outcomes they are seeing is an improved functioning and a decrease in psychiatric symptoms and substance abuse, increased housing stability, and decreased use of intensive services. And by intensive services, I mean things such as emergency room. The idea here is to increase the efficiency of the programs that you are developing for women veterans or veterans in general. And studies show that if you deal with the trauma first and incorporate it into your work, your programs are going to work better for the veterans. So why women veterans? Of the 2.2 million post-9/11 veterans, 19% of them are women. And this goes back to the statistic I mentioned before, that women veterans comprise only 6% of the population using VA services. So as we know, they're 19% of the post-9/11. Where are these women veterans going? Where are the ones with traumatic brain injuries going? 12% of military women are single mothers versus 4% of military men. 24% of post-9/11 female veterans served in combat versus 7% of pre-9/11. And those two last statistics are really talking about how we need to have a mind shift about what it is to be a female veteran. These female veterans are now 3 times as much likely to have served in combat as pre-9/11, and they're 3 times more likely to be a single parent than a man. And they're equally likely to experience post-traumatic stress, irritability, strains in family relationships upon return. Women, right now, as I said, 8% of all veterans by now, growing to 15% by 2036. Prior to the recession, they had an unemployment rate of 16%, double that of female civilians. So prior to the recession, we already had an unemployment issue. And 4 times the risk, women veterans are at 4 times the risk for homelessness than their civilian counterparts. Another set of interesting statistics which have to do with employment and come from the Bureau of Labor Statistics is that the 2011 averages for women non-veterans was 8.2%. For women veterans, it was 9.4%. So a woman veteran, much more likely to be unemployed. Equally astonishingly, I would say, is that women aged 18 to 24, so the percentage of that population that are unemployed and not in school. For non-veterans, it's 15%. For veterans, it's 36%. So that youngest population, that population that went in and served a tour and came out, is the ones that are really experiencing unemployment, not in school. We really have to think about why they're not moving forward with their careers. And I'd like to read you this quote first. This is a quote from a woman veteran. Some women come into the military with stuff from their childhood, and that exacerbates, especially when you have to prove yourself equal to the guys. And what she's talking about is trauma that happens before military experience. 27 to 49% of women veterans have experienced childhood sexual abuse. 35% have experienced childhood physical abuse. 29 to 40% have experienced sexual assault as an adult, and about 50% have experienced physical assault as an adult. We'll now move on to our next poll question. What is the estimated proportion of active duty women who have experienced physical and/or sexual assault by intimate partners?
All right, I'm going to launch that poll now. Please take a moment to answer. Give you about 10 more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So it looks like 2% answered 1 in 10, 44% answered 1 in 5, and 53%, most of the audience, answered 1 in 3.
Well, according to a 2002 survey of active duty military women, the answer is about 1 in 5. And the reason that I'm telling you all of these statistics is to really think about where a traumatic brain injury could have come from. It is not only happening, out in combat or out in the field, but it could also be happening in the home, and it could have happened pre, post, at any point during this woman's life. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the trauma during and after military service. The overarching statistic is that 81 to 93% of women veterans have been exposed to some type of trauma. 81 to 93%. 20 to 48% have experienced military sexual trauma, also called MST. 18 to 19% have experienced domestic violence. 50% have experienced physical assault, again going back to where the brain injury might have occurred. And 80% have experienced sexual harassment. So to continue on what are we looking at? What are the factors contributing to underutilization of services for women veterans? And this, the research we did was looking at homelessness, but the idea is what is causing this disconnect? And this is specific to New York, what I'm reading right here, but these roundtables where we had these discussions with women veterans happened across the country. Here in New York, we did it in Rochester and in New York City, but across the country, they did it in Los Angeles and in San Francisco and Kansas City and in Texas. And so if you would like specifics on what they found specific to your area, I'm happy to connect you with that information. The general idea here in New York was that women veterans have a lack of knowledge about the benefits and services and an underutilization of those available services. They just don't know what's out there for them. They're less likely than their male counterparts to perceive themselves to be veterans or formally identify themselves as veterans, meaning that if you have on your intake sheet a question and a checkbox that says, "Are you a veteran?" A woman who has served in the military is highly unlikely to check that box versus what the chances are that a male veteran is. And what does that mean for us? It means that they are less likely to be connected to the services that are owed to them. Trauma, especially military sexual trauma, can lead to other problems if left untreated. The snowball effect. Mental health issues, including post-traumatic stress, depression, as well as substance abuse. So the trauma can be an instigator for a whole host of other issues. And then finally, what we've been talking about a little bit earlier, issues affecting women before joining the military, such as domestic violence, troubled family life, physical and mental abuse, sexual assault abuse, family history of substance abuse, and lack of stable housing are problems that do not go away after they return from the military. So many women may have used the military as a stable escape. They knew that they were going to have housing. They knew that they were going to have an income. They knew that their life was going to be stable and away from perhaps some of the troubles that they had in their civilian lives. Once they leave the military, they're often returning right back into those same situations. These are some more quotes from women veterans. When you think of veterans, you don't think of women. I thought veteran meant you had been in combat. If in church on Veterans Day, I don't want to stand up. I don't want to raise my hand. It just doesn't seem right to me. I never thought of myself as a veteran, even though I served. I didn't think those words applied to me. Those are all quotes from women veterans that we spoke to about their disconnection from services. And the idea here is to recognize that there are challenges to serving women veterans and to getting them into the programs and the services that are available to them. And the idea is that you take this thought process into consideration when creating your programs, whether or not you're a Veterans Affairs related program or not. How can you incorporate these ideas and these experiences into how you deliver programs to this population? So what did we learn? Women veterans want peer-to-peer services. They want to work with other women veterans. Women veterans need child care to be provided by community-based organizations, meaning if you want a women veteran to participate in your mental health program or your health care program, you need to provide child care or help them figure out some way to manage that. Women veterans want emotional support, including mental health counseling in a community-like setting. This follows with the following, which is that women veterans want services that are less institutional and more inspirational, emphasizing that their current crises, their current issues are a temporary experience. They will not always be in a homeless situation. They will not always be in a mental health crisis. They want that inspirational feeling. So what does the Women's Bureau offer? The trauma guide that I've been speaking about has a number of different sections in it. The first is a user's guide, and in it, it has background information on how to use this guide, as well as descriptions and statistics, or what are the experiences of a female vet. What is trauma-informed care? What is it exactly that one would have to do to have a trauma-informed care environment? And how do we take the principles of trauma-informed care and apply them to the programming that we're providing for women veterans? The next section is an organizational self-assessment. So this is for an organization, whether it's a hospital, a department, a program, but it's a manual of best practices that can be integrated into what you're already doing. So you can see where your strengths and where your areas of improvement are for different areas. So it could be self-assessment on your physical layout. It could be self-assessment on the training you provide for staff. It could be self-assessment on how you get feedback from your participants. Finally, there's a section of resource lists, and these are provider-targeted materials. So there's videos, websites, further reading on areas where you want to make change or you're interested in learning more. Also on our website, you can find the web-based training on how to use the trauma guide, which might be a little more user-friendly. So what's a self-assessment? These are concrete practices that reflect the needs of women veterans, and they're specific recommendations for policy and practice changes as identified in practitioner best practices and academic literature. So these are pinpointed things that you can think about taking on within your organization if you don't believe that your organization is doing the most that it can in that area. How is a self-assessment organized? There's 6 areas. 1, supporting staff development. 2, creating a safe and supportive environment. 3, assessing and planning services. 4, involving consumers. 5, adapting policies. And 6, for some of you, working with children. So the next section, here's the first poll question. My organization has a space that's dedicated to women only.
All right, I'm going to launch that. Please take a moment to answer. Give you about 10 more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So it looks like 26% answered yes and 74% answered no.
All right. Well, here's the reason that I'm asking you this. So what I'm going to do on the next section is to ask you to think about your organization and your goals. Think about the barriers that you face in keeping women engaged. We're going to go through 2 little sections of the self-assessment quickly. And what I would ask you to think about is whether you agree or disagree with a statement regarding your organization. And think, does my organization have room for change here? So you can see this is a copy of the layout of the Trauma Guide self-assessment. And I would ask you to look at, for example, number 3. Does my organization have an environment outside the facility? Is it well lit? Number 5, is my organization's bathrooms well lit? Can my bathroom doors be locked? And finally, number 7, what I asked you before, does my organization have a space that's only for women? This is an example of the self-assessment that you could take with your team or with your administrative branch or your executive branch to think about, are there ways we could improve or change our physical layout to make it more trauma-informed and therefore more friendly to women veterans? Another poll question. My organization's staff receives constant and consistent training on how trauma affects attachment to caregivers and others.
All right, I'm launching that now. Please take a moment to answer. Give you about 10 more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. Oh, very similar. 26% answered yes, and 74% answered no.
Okay. And so the reason that I'm asking you this question is that this is a part of the supporting staff development, looking at the training and education on trauma and mental health that the staff receives. And this is, we want you to think about not only your clinical staff or your social working staff, the staff that works directly and intensively with your client, but I want you to also think about the staff who interact with them at first glance. Who answers the phone when they have a question? Who's the first person they see when they come in the door and they're looking for direction? Do those people as well receive enough training and education in areas that could support women veterans? So let's look at a few of these. Does your staff receive constant and consistent training on intimate partner violence and its impact? How about complex trauma and its impact? What about military sexual trauma and its impact? We talked about how important that is. And finally, we can look at post-traumatic stress disorder. How well does your staff understand how PTSD could affect the way the survivor is interacting with them and understanding what you're trying to communicate to them? So finally, we'll look at this poll. I am familiar with the concept of trauma-informed care, TIC, for veterans, and please
All
choose.
right, I'm going to launch that now. Maybe about 10 more seconds to answer. All right, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. Okay, wow. So 0% answered, we use the concept of trauma-informed care for women veterans in all areas. 18% answered, we use the concept of TIC to inform some programs or policies. 18% also answered, we do not utilize the concept of trauma-informed care. And 64%, the majority, answered that they were not familiar with the concept of trauma-informed care, or TIC.
Well, I'm really glad that you could answer that, and I hope that this webinar is starting to create an interest in what is trauma-informed care and why it may be useful to consider when thinking about how your program serves veterans and women veterans. So why work with us? Why work with the Women's Bureau? As we've been talking about, being trauma-informed and taking into consideration trauma-informed practices, and the WB, the Women's Bureau's Trauma Guide, can help you increase the program participation, increase your program completion rates, and service this underserved and deserving population. Again, this is a free resource. We want your input, and we want to partner with you to help you utilize it. We've been using this for about a year now with different organizations across the country, and we have a set of sort of ideas of what other organizations have done to address different challenges in providing trauma-informed care. We want to provide that information to you. So we look forward truly to working with you on this. What's this process look like for becoming trauma-informed? There's a number of steps you can go through, but we would argue first to identify leaders, people who support this, to champion the change that you want to make, to engage and train your staff on what is trauma-informed care and what is the experience of a women veteran, to address the resistance, what are the stumbling blocks, what are the things that are going to make it difficult for you to promote trauma-informed care in your organization. Complete the self-assessment, and we're happy to help you work through that, of your organization and what it is that you would like to do better and what it is that you're already doing. That's great. Analyze the results. Develop and implement your plan to make changes. Maybe, making all of the changes is not going to be within every organization's reach, but maybe there are pieces of it, low-hanging fruit, that you can attack easily. And then to move forward as you monitor your progress and track your results. So how do we want to work with you? We will help you at the Women's Bureau to work through the guide, analyze your areas for growth, and take steps to create a more fully trauma-informed organization. The goal being to better serve women veterans and make them able to have an easier transition between their military and their civilian careers. One idea that many groups have started as a starting point is to create a working group, a few people in your organization that are dedicated to looking at what is trauma-informed care and how can procedures or policies be adapted to better serve women veterans. So my suggested steps for you. I urge you to review the Trauma Guide. It's available fully online, www.dol.gov/WB for the Women's Bureau/trauma. Talk internally with your staff members, your leadership about the guide, and brainstorm what areas of your program you think could benefit from it. And finally, schedule a meeting with us. We'd love to talk with you about results or possible next steps or things that we've seen that other organizations have done that have worked. Here I'm providing to you in sort of shortened form the contact information for the Women's Bureau offices across the country. I'm happy also to put you in personal contact with them. These are the people who really know how the Trauma Guide has been used in organizations in your area. While I can speak to how it's been used in New York and New Jersey, there are many of my colleagues in Chicago, for example, can tell you better about how they've put it into use in Illinois and Michigan. So please reach out to them. And again, for more information on this or for ideas of best practices in our area, or more information again about the Women Veterans event in June in Westchester, New York, please do contact me. We're very thankful to the Brain Injury Association of New York State, and I'll turn it over to Carla.
We're thankful to have you. Thank you for being here today and doing this. Just before we start the Q&A, just a few informational slides about the Brain Injury Association. We're a statewide nonprofit membership organization that advocates on behalf of individuals with brain injury and their families. We have a wonderful website with lots of free resources. So please visit our website, www.bianys.org. This is our contact information here. All of the slides, the wonderful slides you saw today, will be available after the broadcast. I will be posting them on our website, so that's another reason to check out our website. The recording will be posted there along with the slides. If you like the webinar, like us on Facebook. We love the attention. Let's turn it over now. We'll do some Q&A. And please, again, visit our website, see our resources, and find out more about our future webinars. So we do have some time, some extra time for questions for Jill. The first question I have here from our audience is, do you have any recent data on sexual assault and harassment of women veterans? There has been a lot of information regarding assault and harassment in the past 3 years in the news.
I don't have at my fingertips the access to the data that's beyond what I posted in this webinar, but I would be happy to sort of collect that data and pass it on to you. I can do some research and see what I can find. The data that I have is from when the guide was published, but I'm happy to look for more.
Excellent. Okay. Another question I have here from our audience is, do you suggest that organizations try to make changes in all areas of the self-assessment, or should we concentrate on the areas we are certain we can make a change?
That's a great question. What we suggest first is that the organization do the entire self-assessment. And then the idea is that we don't want it to be overwhelming, the types of changes that you make. So it's best to start with what's going to be easiest to change and to work that way. There are a number of organizations that often start with the low-hanging fruit about education and training and bringing people into an awareness, whereas some of maybe the physical layout changes are a little bit harder and perhaps more expensive to make. So we suggest, a gradual approach, but the idea being to really look holistically at the changes you want to make and then start sort of chipping away at the ones that you're able to tackle first.
Okay, I did get a few questions about the materials. Again, I'll just say it one more time. I can't say it enough. Visit our website. We will be posting the recording and we will be posting the slides. I did notice that a few of the slides, for whatever reason, the GoToWebinar software did cut off some of the information. Again, the slides, the presentation in its entirety in its normal PDF format will be available on our website in case you did want that contact information. I did receive another audience question, I should say, attendee question. Is there a list of TIC, trauma-informed care providers, for example, providers that utilize trauma-informed care? And is there a specific funding stream through the Veterans Administration that you know of for women veterans?
Those are both very good questions. I the answer to both is that I don't know right now. There are ways to go about finding that information. I'd be happy to work with you on it. The first idea is that trauma-informed care is something that the SAMHSA, which is part of the National Institutes of Health, promotes as a mechanism for working with these populations, trauma-afflicted populations. And so one way that we might start looking at that is to look at who's using these sort of SAMHSA guidelines. But I don't have a concrete list of these are organizations that use trauma-informed care with me right now. As a funding stream related to women veterans, I work for the U.S. Department of Labor, which is separate, as we know, from the
Actually, I'm sorry to interrupt. The asker did correct what they wrote and changed their question to say is there specific funding stream through the Veterans Administration that you know of for trauma services for women veterans? So I guess specific to trauma services.
Okay. The answer from me is still the same. I do not know of a specific funding stream related to trauma services. I know there are other services related to supportive services for veterans' families and other sort of housing-related services, but related on the health side for trauma services, I don't know of any, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and I'd be happy to help someone look into that further.
Thank you. And just a reminder to anyone who does not get to ask their question or has a personal question, feel free to email it to me. I will make sure that it gets to Jill. So again, if you don't get a chance to ask your question or for whatever reason you'd like to ask it privately, please email it to me. My contact information, again, will be in the follow-up email from GoToWebinar. I have a very long last name, so as soon as you get that follow-up email from GoToWebinar, please look for my contact information on that. Another question from one of our attendees is, what kind of feedback have you had from organizations that have used the trauma guide? Great question.
That is a great question. The types of organizations first that have used it are varied, but perhaps I'll give you an example of an actual Veterans Affairs specific organization that has used the trauma guide. So here in New York State, there is a Veterans Health Care Center that has an emergency room, and the ER department of that emergency room read the trauma guide and was inspired by it, but also the experiences that they had seen of women veterans coming into the emergency room. And what they did was they took the principles of trauma-informed care and they took the principles of the guide and they created a space separate for women veterans within the emergency room so that the women veterans themselves didn't have to undress themselves in a curtained-off area, that this area had walls and it had a door and it was separate from the rest of the emergency room sector. They also created a team that was dedicated to understanding better the types of emergencies that might present themselves for women veterans, and the women veterans themselves could choose to work with that team or the regular VA emergency services at their choice. So they've had a really outstanding response to providing these services in a trauma-informed way that sort of allows the women veterans individually to say and open up in ways that they hadn't been seeing them open up before in sort of the more general ER area. So that's one example of a response. There are many other smaller ways that organizations have made changes, but I would say that small or large organizations that have taken this on have found it both challenging and very interesting to see the sort of results that it can bring.
Excellent. Someone had asked for me to repeat the website. I'm unsure if they meant the BIA NYS website or the website for the trauma guide. So I don't know if you want to, there you go. So those are the two websites.
For the trauma guide, it's dol.gov/WB for Women's Bureau /trauma.
And again, for the Brain Injury Association of New York State, it's www.bianys.org. I did get another question, Jill, about possibly presenting, so I'll send you the information about that in an email so you could get in contact with that individual. Another attendee asked, is there one branch of the armed forces that have a higher number of women veterans that would have the trauma than others? Maybe could help working with those branches to work on lowering the numbers. That's an interesting question.
That would be interesting. Let's see, I don't have the access to the numbers right now. Off the top of my head, I'm not going to venture a guess, but the data to that sort of information might be available on www.health.mil, because it's on that website where they also break down the brain injuries by armed services branch. So I would think that perhaps we could find that data in that area as well.
I have a comment from one of the audience members. I believe TRICARE covers PTSD for those still active in active duty. VAMC services are offered for veterans beyond that. This person doesn't know of any specific funding to the diagnosis.
That's referring back to perhaps the funding stream for trauma services.
I did get a nice comment from one of our other audience members that they are grateful that the VA and the Department of Labor are starting to recognize the difference between the care needed for women veterans, and she wants to thank you for what you are doing. She's a 20-year female veteran, so we always love to see that. So thank you for that comment. I have one more question from one of our attendees that asks about cognitive challenges. And I don't know if you can help with this, Jill, or if you know of anything. If you want to find out more about resources that are related to TBI, please feel free to contact us, the Brain Injury Association. But this individual says they did not see any mention of cognitive challenges that usually contribute to success in the community after TBI. What are the implications that you know of for women veterans around loss of cognitive functioning? I'm not sure if that's in relation to utilizing the Women's Bureau services. I don't know if you...
It's probably in relation to the cognitive challenge in making the transition between military and civilian life, meaning that if a person has experienced traumatic brain injury and then you are trying to help them make the transition post-military into a civilian life, into a job, into sort of outside a military functioning world. How do we do that, and what are those challenges? I don't have data with me right now on the cognitive challenges and how that affects it, but within the resources that are within the trauma guide, there are places, as Carla suggested, also to follow up with about the more specifics about those challenges.
All right. Thank you, Jill. I don't have any more questions from our audience at this point. So let me just one more time say thank you so much, Jill, for being here today. Thank you to the Women's Bureau Region 2, U.S. Department of Labor. Again, we will be providing the slides and the recording of the webinar on our website, www.bianys.org. And if you did not get to ask a question today, or you would choose to do so privately, please email me your question. I really encourage you to do so, and I will make sure that it gets to Jill. And I know she will be happy to help and to answer. Thank you so much, Jill. We really do appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Please stay tuned and check our website for our upcoming webinars. Thank you.